You're talking about a lot of aid, and you're talking about a lot of financial assistance. Now, that means Saudi Arabia's position vis-a-vis military procurement is basically aimed at becoming a regional net security provider. And it would like to train and it would like to learn from countries in its proximity, countries that have a good experience of war fighting. And if you look at the Middle Eastern region in collect and you go a little bit beyond, Pakistan is the obvious choice. Now, this is where I believe that this defense agreement is more about learning and less about the utilization of some nuclear deterrent. That's where I think it goes.
Sir, thank you very much. Acha, sir, another question regarding to Pakistan, the signatory of proliferation treaty. So, Pakistan, it's a good multilateralism, good example between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. And ये multilateralism की आजकल बड़ा ट्रेंड चल रहा है कि multilateralism की दुनिया तरफ जा रही है. तो सर, जो पाकिस्तान सिग्नेटरी है ना प्रोलिफरेशन ट्रीटी का, तो उसका क्या फीचर बनता है? क्योंकि फिर तो पाकिस्तान ने शुरुआत कर दी कि ट्रीटी जो है इसको तो ब्रोकन ने पाकिस्तान ने कर दिया. इसके बारे में आपका क्या कहना है सर? थैंक यू.
मैं इसको थोड़ा सा करेक्ट कर देता हूं. पाकिस्तान एनपीटी का सिग्नेटरी नहीं है. पाकिस्तान हैज नॉट साइंड द एनपीटी एंड देयर आर क्वाइट अ लॉट ऑफ डॉक्यूमेंटेशंस ऑफ दैट काइंड दैट पाकिस्तान हैज नॉट साइंड. और हमारा उसके ऊपर एक सेपरेट व्यू है. We look at the non-proliferation treaty from a different angle. So I'm not sure इस क्वेश्चन में ये जो फ्रेम था ये सही बैठेगा. We are not part of the NPT. But that does not mean we are a proliferator. That does not mean we are going to suddenly pick our nuclear weapons and give them to somebody else. That's, I think, a myth New Delhi would like to talk about very healthily. कि Pakistan's nuclear weapons are for rent and Pakistan can give them to any Muslim state. I remember 70s के अंदर there were some Indian authors who were publishing books calling them the Muslim bomb, the rise of the Muslim bomb when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had announced that we would be nuclearizing. So वो Muslim bomb का लफ्ज़ इस्तेमाल हुआ. And Mushahid Hussain Sayyid साहब की तरह I would also say the same thing. Bombs don't have religions. Bombs belong to states. Nuclear weapons belong to states. They do not belong to ideologies. ये हम लोगों ने अर्ली 2000s में भी सुना था कि न्यूक्लियर टेररिज्म होगा और वो इसी तरह होगा कि पाकिस्तानी न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स जो होंगे दे वुड फॉल इनटू द हैंड्स ऑफ टेररिस्ट्स एंड टेररिस्ट्स वुड यूज देम. आई मीन न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स ना हो गए मजाक हो गया. These are complicated sensitive technologies directly connected to your nuclear command authority in which your entire government is involved. When a state says that you're going to proliferate, they're actually saying that your entire state, the whole machinery, is responsible for proliferation. And that's a hyperbole I don't agree with. Now, the second part, would that have an impact on the defense agreement? I'm not sure, and I think I firmly believe that Pakistan's mutual defense agreement with Saudi Arabia does not have a nuclear dimension. International community would like to call it ambiguity. International community would like to call it something else. But these are the international community's concerns that they've been voicing about nuclear weapon states, any other nuclear weapon state besides themselves. So if you're a commentator from the United States of America or you're a commentator from the United Kingdom, you would see every other nuclear weapon as a hostile weapon. And your own nuclear deterrent is the only ultimate security guarantee, which means that you don't trust other nuclear bombs. Therefore, you will have a negative worldview about them. And that's the kind of negativity that exists or persists. And Pakistan, I think, the academic community, the young scholars that I'm talking to today, should not be carried away by these sentiments. They need to be very careful with the choice of words that they employ, with the choice of theoretical assessments they make, with the choice of hyperboles that they believe in, because labeling everything as nuclear just because the word strategic comes into it is not the right approach. Uh, Pakistan's perception as a nuclear weapon state that can just give away its nuclear weapons, it's very undermining, it's very demeaning. It makes this whole case that we are an irresponsible nuclear weapon state and we are proliferation happy and we would proliferate to the Muslim world for peanuts. We would just give it to people because we would love other people to have it. It's not the case. Any state that wants to build a nuclear deterrent has to justify national security first. Then it has to justify regional security. Then it has to convince the international community. And if any one of them, if it fails, nuclearization may or may not happen. And once you design or develop your nuclear deterrent, that's exclusively for your own national security. It cannot be lent to others. And the extended deterrence of the United States that most people allude to, it was a Cold War timeline. It was a very different world altogether. The Western European states were really afraid of the Soviet expansion in the eastern part of Europe. So they wanted a risky deterrent to work. Same is the case with Japan as far as the rise of China is concerned and the rise of Soviet Union in the Cold War. So they wanted a risky strategy. I'm not sure that kind of a risk exists in this part of the world so seriously that some steps so unreasonable need to be taken. And if there was ever to be an unreasonable step in the Middle East in this direction, that would be nuclearization of a Middle Eastern state, not the extension of deterrence by a non-Middle Eastern state to a Middle Eastern state. I don't see that happening.
हाँ सर, थैंक यू। एज अ न्यूक्लियर वेपन कंट्रीज की ये एक रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी होती है कि वो न्यूक्लियर इस तरह की सेंसिटिव टेक्नोलॉजी किसी के साथ शेयर ना करें। अच्छा सर, फहीदा अशरफ का शी वांट आस्किंग अबाउट to what extent does Pakistan-Saudi Arabia agreement to contribute to the strengthening for the Pakistan foreign policy post in the longer run, basically? Thank you.
So this is an interesting question on two lines.
Yeah.
It on one end says Pakistan needs good friends to somehow springboard or catapult its foreign policy objectives. And on the other, foreign policy is the expression of national policy. So it's Pakistan's foreign office that needs to do the good job. So nowadays, what we usually see is that Pakistan is somehow center stage. And almost every country significantly operable in the region of the Middle East and South Asia wants to talk to Pakistan. And I'll tell you why that's happening. The security partnership between the United States and India was supposed to have India do something in the Pacific Ocean region. And if it cannot do anything in the Pacific Ocean, then it has to stop Chinese influence from spilling over from the Pacific into the Indian Ocean. So I'm giving you a lot of financial assistance, a lot of military assistance, a lot of diplomatic leverage, a lot of treaty concessions, and I want you to do something. And then the remarkable event happens that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi decides that whatever was supposed to be looked at China, whatever was supposed to be launched at China, or whatever was supposed to be designed for China should first be tested in Pakistan. Because Indian strategic thinkers believe Pakistan to be an extension of China. And that's one misconception. Now, I take this theory and I apply it to Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. Pakistan's position as an independent state in the canvas of nations is not dependent on other states supplementing its foreign policy. It's rather a convergence of interests, defensive, economic, diplomatic, political, or elsewise, that would mandate two states to sit down and talk about something or to get to an agreement. And I think that part where this thing becomes important is the lack of understanding of security at the Middle East, but the influence that they hold in the world over. So Pakistan's concern right now, in which it would be willing to talk to Saudi Arabia on an extended defense agreement, and not the extended of the nuclear kind, so let me be very clear on that, would be that Pakistan would want Saudi Arabia to leverage its diplomatic position in Afghanistan to stabilize Afghanistan. And why it needs to be stabilized? Because if Afghanistan is not stabilized, there is a high possibility that there is a chance that it would implode. And an imploded Afghanistan, if we remember our Yugoslavia correctly, is not the right kind of environment for the region that is housed in proximity. So I'm sure Pakistan's understanding with Saudi Arabia is a long-standing defense commitment for stabilizing the region rather than destabilizing the region. And I think that's where the foreign policy works in tandem between Pakistan and the KSA. It's not that Pakistan springboards Saudi Arabia or vice versa. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much for your answer. Sir, Shamsa
So there is a
Razak,
very good, a very important question, and I would say it is a much asked question, और ये एक मानस question भी इसको हम कह सकते हैं. Aryan Buzdar ने पूछा है कि in case of an escalation between Pakistan and India, how would Saudi Arabia respond?
So without seeing the defense agreement, do you think Saudi Arabia would suddenly send warships to the Indian Ocean? No. Do you think that Saudi Arabia would start providing military assistance to Pakistan in the form of guns and grenades and tanks and APCs? No. Do you think Saudi Arabia would suddenly allow its air bases to be frequently and freely used by the Pakistani armed forces, by the Pakistani Air Force as a staging point? Well, strategically, it's not possible. I think Pakistani Air Force can do a better job flying from Pakistan to India because the proximity is much closer rather than going first to Saudi Arabia and then coming all the way to India to attack. Would there be a possibility that Saudi Arabia would offer oil or fuel during crises? Now that's where it becomes interesting. Is this defense agreement part of the augmented warfighting capability without the kinetics being involved? I cannot comment on it unless I understand or see some part of the detail. But if I was to speculate, and this is purely a hypothesis, within this hypothesis, will Saudi Arabia be assisting Pakistan in a war with India? I'm not sure that's happening. And there are two reasons why. Saudi Arabia already has an extensive alliance with the Republic of India. And the second is that Saudi Arabia would not like to involve itself into a crisis or a conflict that it does not have relevance to. But there is one thing which is important. Does this defense agreement and the ambiguity around it deter states from misadventures? I think that's where it's important. India's recent misadventure in May 2025 was a very risky undertaking. Now, even though Pakistan was able to defend itself, and it had to defend itself, and it did defend itself beautifully, and India was significantly and sufficiently deterred, the Indian aggression is not toned down. And these agreements give India a thought bubble that it needs to rethink its priorities while engaging with Pakistan. And I think that's where it works best.
Okay, thank you so much. There is another question from our intern as well. Anwar Khalid is asking, what is the core factors that brings both states to sign this defense pact? And I think, like, obviously, well, he thinks that Israeli aggression in this region and Qatar attack is not only a sole purpose. So basically, he's asking the core factors that bring both states to sign this defense pact.
We talked about it in my presentation, and the idea is that this is a renewal of an already existing defense agreement. The defense agreement that is there since 1967. It's just a reaffirmation of that commitment. There was a significant amount of time between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia where such a defense agreement, even though it did exist, was not put to practice. And I think Mohammed bin Salman, as the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, I think he wants to revisit that part. He wants to make it more active and he wants to make it more known. I think he wants his armed forces to perform better, and if not, to just be trained better. And I think that's a good deal. But the other part of the question, would it have an implication? Or is it a reactionary response of what Israel did in Qatar? Now, what happened in Qatar has to be understood from a purely political standpoint. And this is where I will offer you and the audience today a situation that is not very much talked about. The entire international community wants to recognize Palestine, and they are more than willing to talk to Mahmoud Abbas, but they're not willing to talk to Hamas. And if you go back in 2006, the Palestinian Legislative Council and the elections that were held had Hamas win 44.5% of the seats. So Ismail Hania became the prime minister from an election, and there was an internal scuffle between Hamas, Al Fatah, and the other groups as to why Hamas should not be on the table. And that's where you see that when Hamas leaders are targeted elsewhere, other than Palestine, other than Gaza, the Muslim community does not necessarily react as aggressively as they used to back in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s. That aggression is going down. Because maybe, and this is a maybe, maybe there is a realization that Hamas is a third party in this conflict. So you have Mahmoud Abbas on one side, you in the West Bank, you have Hamas on Gaza, and you have Israel represented by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And this is a triangular relationship rather than a bilateral relationship. So when Hamas leaders are being knocked out, even though states who receive such attacks and leaders are killed on their territory react very aggressively, they don't offer aggressive reprisals to Israel because to some extent, the Muslim community leaders, I think, and this is my assumption, I think they believe that Hamas is a third party to this negotiation, and a third party isn't really a suitable outcome. So if Palestine is to be recognized, it has to be recognized as a whole. That's where Pakistan's position comes in. We don't have a problem with a settlement between Israel and Palestine unless there are two criteria that need to be met. The first criteria, human rights violations need to stop. The genocidal activities in Gaza definitely need to stop. And the second is the territorial acquisitions by Israel after 1967 need to be reverted back. And these are two principled stances that Pakistan maintains. And I think when these countries receive Israeli strikes in which Hamas leaders are dying, it's a Middle East political problem. It's very technical, it's very complicated, and a country like Pakistan cannot just jump in and offer an explanation. And I'm not sure that would be the sole reason. I agree with you that it's not the sole reason why Saudi Arabia would offer a defense agreement to Pakistan or why Pakistan would be in a mood to accept a defense agreement from Saudi Arabia. And that's what I said. It's not a reactionary agreement. It's an agreement that was already there. It's just being reiterated. It's just being reaffirmed.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, for such a brief answer to that question. So, last question I would like to ask you, will this agreement destabilize the ties of Pakistan and China? And he's adding in that question that Pakistan can spread China's technology out, and China will not like it. He's asking that.
I like the question. I like it on two
Yes, sir.
levels.
That is a very interesting question और बहुत अच्छा क्वेश्चन पूछा है सरफराज अब्बासी हैट्स ऑफ टू यू बहुत अच्छा क्वेश्चन
I really like
जी
the
सर
question because Pakistan would be selling Chinese equipment, and this brokerage would anger China. I think if you're selling their agreement, their weapons, I'm sorry, and those weapons are being sold like hotcakes, I think China would be happy rather than angry. कि उसका सामान बिक रहा है और देर इज अ गुड एडवर्टाइजमेंट दैट पाकिस्तान इज मेकिंग. नॉट टू मेंशन हम जहां जाएंगे जाके बताएंगे 6-0 है, तो ये जहाज बड़े अच्छे हैं ले लो. एंड आई थिंक दोज कंट्रीज वुड बी मोर देन हैप्पी टू टेक देम. एंड बट दैट्स नॉट हाउ द मिलिट्री इंडस्ट्रियल कॉम्प्लेक्स वर्क्स. I think it works by the choice of the buyer rather than the compulsions of the seller. So you have to first make this offer that I'm willing to receive equipment. And whatever military industrial complex is out there willing to supply, I would be more than happy to receive it. And then you sit down with the supplier and the receiver, and there is no middleman in between. You sit down, you discuss the weapons, you discuss the quantity, you discuss the modalities of once the weapons reach and how they would be used. And that's exactly how the MIC works. It's not that a state can offer weapons on behalf of some nation. It's not that simple. I know it looks like a shopkeeper transaction, but it's not a shopkeeper's transaction that we understand in common parlance. It's a technical agreement where one has to understand the limitations to the weapons that are being provided. So the weapons that you see United States giving to European Union under NATO may not necessarily be the same weapons, even though the systems themselves would be the same, wouldn't be the same characteristics of the weapons being supplied to India or Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. They would have their shortcomings and limitations, and they're built in intentionally. They're put there intentionally because they have an upsetting effect. And that's where it becomes interesting. China wouldn't mind Pakistan reaching out to areas of influence where China does not exercise full sovereignty, or Pakistan would be reaching out to states where China is a second tier though influential, but second tier diplomatic influencer in the first place. Middle East procurely and specifically is a US domain since the 1990s. And the United States would not just let it go. China would have to make inroads, and those inroads can only be made by partners. That's where the second part of your question, and that's why I said I like it. That's the second part. If Pakistan is able to create a breakthrough where Pakistan is able to push the military industrial complex of the United States away and bring in the Chinese MIC effectively, well, that's a big breakthrough. But think about it. Would Pakistan be in a position to upset the United States military industrial complex, even though it's already balancing between China and the US? I'm not sure that prospect is happening. So I think this part of the question is this reaction that the international community feels is happening. And I don't agree with it.
Shah Sahab, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Uh,
We're waiting for the next question, I guess.
Basically, I'm waiting for the Shah Sahab, Faraz Shah Sahab.
Well,
He's a
sir,
moderator.
if you allow me, I have one more question as well.
Sure, go ahead.
Shah Sahab, we cannot hear you properly.
Could you unmute?
He's unmuted. Faraz Shah Sahab, we cannot hear you properly. Uh,
So I'm going through these questions, and there's a very interesting question
okay, sir.
that what would the response be from countries like Iran and Turkey? And that's very interesting. I've I wouldn't say much about Iran because Iran already understands the sensitivity of the defense agreement. It already understands the delicate balance that exists, and it knows that Pakistan is not going to upset it. Pakistan did not upset it before, and it's not going to upset it again. But Turkey is a very interesting dimension. Turkey's military industrial complex is a growing military industrial complex, and it's a very popular military industrial complex. It's the kind of military industrial complex that is now taking the lead in unmanned combat aircraft, the UAVs and the UCAVs. And we've seen their UAVs and UCAVs fighting it out everywhere, whether it was Pakistan, whether it was Azerbaijan and Armenia, whether it was Iran itself, whether it was the Russian Federation. These drones are taking this region over like a storm. And even though there are plenty of other military industrial complexes that can offer more better, well equipped, high endurance drones, Turkey's military industrial complex is growing at an immensely impressive rate. And is there a possibility, given Turkey's history of the Ottoman Empire and given the legacy that President Erdogan was alluding to, the whole concern that once the Versailles Treaty and the limitations thereof would be ending, would Turkey be going to reconsolidate the Middle East? I think that's where the Turkey military industrial complex becomes important. It's one of the significant suppliers to Pakistan. The equipment that Turkey has supplied to Pakistan is effective. It's built on European standards. It's built on NATO standards, but it's at half the price. And would it be up for offer to Saudi Arabia? Uh, I must confess, this is a dimension I would love to explore. I'm sure I don't have a reasonable, logical answer to it. Would Saudi Arabia be willing to buy Turkey's equipment from Pakistani assistance? Would there be this mutual learning in which Pakistan would expose uh, Turkey-based weapon systems to the Saudi royal forces, and they would experience or they would at least learn about them, develop an interest, and then contact Turkey? I think that's a very, very interesting dimension. And if that happens, it's a very different take on middle. I really like the question. It really has me thinking right now. Take So if there is any other question, I'd be more than happy to take.
वो टाइम के शॉर्टेज की वजह से we can conclude this session.
Sure.
सर थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर योर टाइम. सो आई वाज जब से इजराइल ने अटैक ऑन कतर, सो वी आर ऑर्गेनाइज 3 वेबिनार्स. सो वी सी किसी ने भी अभी तक इतने नहीं किए जितने हम कर चुके हैं. तो इट्स हम एक हमारी टीम जो है ना कमिटेड है कि हम कुछ करना चाह रहे हैं. असल बेसिकली ये यूथ का इनिशिएटिव है, यूथ ने ये इनिशिएटिव लिया है. तो हम भी इनपुट देना चाह रहे हैं पाकिस्तान की फॉरेन पॉलिसी में, किस तरह की फॉरेन पॉलिसी होनी चाहिए, पाकिस्तान जो है ना आगे कैसे बढ़ सकता है. तो ये पाकिस्तान का हमने इनिशिएटिव लिया है. वी आल्सो आई एम आल्सो थैंकफुल ऑफ हिज एक्सीलेंसी साउथ अफ्रीका काउंसलर, पॉलिटिकल काउंसलर हिज एक्शन, उन्होंने भी अटेंड ये किया वेबिनार. तो उनका मैं भी शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ. अच्छा सर, मैं आई आल्सो आई वांट एड समथिंग अबाउट के ये जो सर्विस है ये फ्री नहीं होनी चाहिए. ये जो पाकिस्तान न्यूक्लियर एक अम्ब्रेला दे रहा है सऊदी अरेबिया को, तो व्हेन वी सी द पाकिस्तान इंडिया वॉर, नो वन कैन, सऊदी मिडिल ईस्ट की तरफ से कोई भी हमारे साथ मतलब स्टैंड नहीं किया कि नहीं, किस कंट्री ने भी. तो ये जो सर्विस है वो फ्री नहीं होनी चाहिए, इसके भी बड़े हैवी चार्जेस होने चाहिए, जैसे हाउ यूनाइटेड स्टेट उनको चार्ज करता है, हमें भी चार्ज करने चाहिए. और सर वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग सिचुएशन, जनरल असेंबली का इजलास भी चल रहा है. तो ईरान के प्रेसिडेंट वेलकम दिस एग्रीमेंट बिटवीन पाकिस्तान एंड सऊदी अरेबिया. इट्स वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग सिचुएशन. सो तो आप सबका शुक्रिया अदा मैं करता हूँ जिन्होंने ये अटेंड किया, स्पेशली सर का जिन्होंने हमें इतना इम्पोर्टेंट डिस्कोर्स दिया कि हमें एडुकेट किया इस अहम टॉपिक पे, जो इंटरनेशनल अफेयर्स में ये सबसे डोमिनेंट टॉपिक है, पाकिस्तान सऊदी अरेबिया डिफेंस एग्रीमेंट. सर थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर योर टाइम. तो इंशाल्लाह वी विल एंगेज यू अनदर वेबिनार. सर थैंक यू
Thank you
वेरी
so
मच फॉर
much.
योर टाइम सर. थैंक यू. अल्लाह हाफिज. टेक केयर सर.
Inshallah. Thank
थैंक
you
यू
so
सर.
much.
थैंक यू. अल्लाह हाफिज.
Thank you
बाय
so
बाय.
much.
अल्लाह
Allah
हाफिज.
Hafiz.
अल्लाह
Have a good evening.
हाफिज. थैंक यू.